Shelby, I have a good memory, so you can be sure that if this account isn't 100% accurate, it is too close to matter. I wrote this for you, so you know who you are. You are facing great adversity, as I did. In your case, the stakes are infinitely higher, if I may be loose mathematically. I wrote these letters so you would have a first-hand account of how we humans are, how we respond to difficulty, and what is expected of you, what Terra needs in this dark hour. You know I'm well suited to write this history. My friends and I made this history, but you don't know how it happened, so I'm going to tell you, beginning with the day I learned that my life, as I had known it, was over. I was sitting on a park bench in London. Parliament was in session, and I was a lobbyist. My schedule consisted of waking around 10 in the morning and lazing about for several hours, reading, taking care of correspondence, etc. In the evening, I hit the party circuit, cornering drunk members of Parliament for a friendly discussion where I would gently steer their opinions. It was known but not stated that my family was generous with its friends. I was not paid for this, not directly. No, I lobbied Parliament to represent my views and my family's views, which were one and the same. Mostly I just played defense against new taxes or regulations. At a party the night before, I was not playing defense, but agitating for positive action, namely the construction of a naval facility in the Falklands that could serve as a base for a carrier fleet. The La Plata Wars had destabilized South America, and Argentina was more bellicose with every victory in the field. The Royal Air Force could stand off an invasion of the Falklands, but was not sufficient to counter growing Argentinian hegemony in the South Atlantic. We needed more ships. The backbencher I was speaking with nodded agreeably and then shook his head, saying, I can understand protecting the Falklands, but do we need a whole bloody fleet to do it? It's not just the Falklands, I said. It's also about the ability to project force in the surrounding trade routes. What trade routes? The MP took another drink from a passing waiter. I remained silent while he took a few gulps of his gin and tonic, and he continued, I mean, if the RGs want to try the Falklands again, I say give 'em what for, but aside from that, I see no need for more sea power in the South Atlantic. Well, there is the Drake Passage to consider. The Drake Passage? It's a strait between South America and Antarctica. Oh, yes, of course. I hesitated. This was usually where I lost people. Well, I have a good reason to believe that when Antarctica is developed, the Ross Sea area, the MP butted in. What in blazes are you talking about? Antarctica is never going to be developed. Supposing it is, the Ross Sea area would be one of the first regions of the continent to carry on a good deal of trade, and the most direct route from London is through the Drake Passage. He looked away in apparent boredom and waved his hand. What you say may be so, but I say let the Yanks worry about it. We can't afford adventuring like that. I'd lost him. That is precisely my point. We can't afford it. The kingdom's vital interest demands that we husband our economy carefully. Now take the upcoming farm bill, for instance. This fool, this hitchhiker on the ship of state who fancied himself a member of the crew, could be convinced to vote against a common piece of largesse, perhaps saving the ratepayers a few pounds each, but ask him to make a commitment to Britain's long-term interests, and he goes deaf, penny-wise, pound-foolish. So it went. I managed to do a little good here and there, but I failed to do any great good. The world I had grown up in was gone. Every year seemed to bring new failures, new inadequacies, new threats. And anyone who expressed concern about this trend was either ignored or shunned, as one is at a dinner party who brings up a rude subject. thought about this as I sat on the park bench watching the sun set. I thought how people used to say that the sun never set on the British Empire. Now it sets every day, and the nights kept getting longer, it seemed. Then I thought it was about time to move on. The crazies would be out soon to take over the park with their shenanigans. "Oh, look, there's one now," I said aloud. A streetwise young fellow from East London pulled up on his bicycle. He went by the name Skeezer and was a messenger. He worked for what was perhaps the largest non-electronic message service on Terra, operated by Prince Charlie, Lord of the Underworld. This service was not fast, but it was totally reliable. He either did not hear or disregarded my comment. "Tuppet evening to you, Aggie." Aggie was my sobriquet among the lower classes, whom I consorted with for practical reasons, such as availing myself of this excellent message service. It was based on my initials, A.G. "And to you, Skeezer," I said. "What you doing?" "Just enjoying a fine summer evening, watching the sun set." As if he read my thoughts, he said, "It's set a long time ago, mate. No more Churchill, no more Nelson. The country's in the hands of people like you and me now, street hustlers." "You and I." "Huh? Never mind. What are you hustling tonight?" £20. I handed him the money. "You'd better have winning lottery numbers for me, Skeezer, my lad." He made the note disappear and said, "A big shot from Japan is looking for you. Name like Teflon, Techno." "Tetsu?" I said, restraining the urge to leap up from my bench. Skeezer poked the tip of his tongue out the side of his mouth and rolled his eyes skyward, as if deep in thought. "Yeah, that sounds right. He's staying at the Iron Arms Hotel." "What does he want?" "Can't say, Governor, but I have the impression he made a special trip to London just to see you. Only he didn't call you Aggie, or Andrew, or Mr. Gray. He called you young Lord Trampier." "He did he? Maybe he's trying to buy our golf course. He wouldn't be the first." I handed the Skeezer 10 more pounds and said, "Good work. Now go forth and sin no more." He got on his bike and pedaled away happily to other adventures. I got up from the bench slowly, reeling. What could he want? It had to be important. One of Terra's richest men, Tetsu, never made an idle action. I estimated that for him to stop in London for any reason must involve consequences in the millions of pounds at least. The hotel was 6 blocks away, but I decided to walk the whole distance. The exercise, I knew, would settle my nerves and sharpen my mind. Whatever lay ahead, I would need my wits. On the way, I imagined different reasons why Tetsu wanted to see me and just as swiftly discarded them. Nothing seemed to fit. I never suspected that my first guess was correct until I knew. Since then, I have more often relied on first guesses. I strode into the lobby, jacket slung over my shoulder, a slight flush on my face. It was quiet. The few clerks were idly typing behind the desk, paying me no mind. They knew I would ask for assistance if needed. There were 2 people reading newspapers by themselves. One seemed Arabic, the other Luxembourgian. There was also a small Japanese man with opaque glasses who glided silently across the lobby to greet me. he whispered. Dr. Tetsu is on the top floor. Come with me. Turning on one heel, he went to a freight elevator behind some massive pillars. I followed. Why are we taking the freight elevator? The man shrugged. When the door opened on the penthouse, I had by then guessed that the arrangement was for security and privacy. Tetsu himself was sitting on a couch under a giant skylight. I could see shadows moving on the roof. My host was motionless, legs stretched out in front of him, arms hanging limply at his sides. I had a wild thought that he was dead, then I perceived a slight motion in his chest. The minion whispered, Dr. Tetsu, Mr. Gray. Tetsu spoke in a normal voice that sounded unnaturally loud. Thank you, leave us. The minion vanished. He turned to me. Mr. Gray, please sit down. His eyes were hidden behind black rectangular lenses. I selected a reclining chair, sat, pulled the lever, and put my feet up. I stretched a bit and said, What can I do for you, sir? Tetsu said, I understand you are a professional lobbyist. I frowned. I don't know what you mean. I'm certainly interested in Parliament, but it's not anything I get paid for. I see it as more of a civic duty. You're not motivated by self-interest? Of course I am. I'm a subject of the United Kingdom, and I want my country on a sound footing. If it isn't, then I and everyone else bear the awful consequences. Especially you, coming from a wealthy family with extensive business interests. I was nonplussed for a moment, then replied, I'd say that's the pot calling the kettle black, but it would be a gross understatement. You practically are the Japanese economy. Don't you lobby your government? Oh, yes. He smirked. But I don't have anything like your experience or as much time on my hands. Dr. Tetsu, I know that you are busy and important, but I'm mystified as to the purpose of this interview. I placed my hands on the arms of the chair as if about to leap to my feet, though those stayed recumbent. He stood up with a fluid motion. Would you like something to drink? Scotch. I was bemused to see a real fat cat walk to the bar to pour me some amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He seemed to be watching me, but I couldn't tell on account of those damned glasses. I took my scotch and sipped, letting it spread over my whole tongue and down my throat, scorching every taste bud. It was musty, dusty, and complex, with a whiff of oak and sherry, and smooth as water. My lips tingled. Greedily, I took another larger sip. What was it? I took a quicker sip, trying to grasp a subtle note of flavor before the alcohol could overwhelm it. Then I was certain. This is Trampier 20th Century Scotch. Grinning, Tetsu nodded. You do me too much honor. I almost never drink from this batch. I can't afford it. I'm eager to be of service to a patron of one of our finest scotches. I'll ask you again, what can I do for you, sir? Tetsu tipped his head back, finishing his scotch, and it was only then I realized my own glass was empty. He was on his feet and stretched out his hand. More? Please. As he was refilling our glasses, he said, You can start by not calling me sir. I'm the same age as you, and I'm not your social superior. There are some things I may want your help with, but not as an employee or hired gun. I see you as more of an independent contractor, and I want you to think of me as an equal. Before I could ask him what it was he wanted, again, he went on, I also want you to be assured that I can help you regarding what you deem important. I caught occasional glimpses of his eyes behind the lenses, and they were constantly in motion, eyebrows, eyelids, and orbs directing a constant stream of data that played across the inside of his lenses. How much of his attention was he devoting to this interview? 10%? 1%? He might not be my social superior, but I was impressed by his colossal intellect. I might beat him in poker, but in any contest of raw smarts, I would be outdone. Not wanting to be outdone in any manner, I would play the game more like poker, less like chess. Show him only what I had to, while trying to get him to reveal everything. So how can you help me? Besides buying my best scotch and feeding it to me, that is? Stone-faced, he said, I didn't buy it, I stole it. Disbelief, anger, puzzlement, and irritation were on my face at once. Before I could ask him if he was joking, with the suddenness of a tsunami clapping cold water on some hapless town, Tetsu erupted in manic laughter that ebbed into inane tittering, and he managed to gasp, Yes, of course. No, I didn't actually. A single tear ran onto his cheek from under the dark glasses. He removed the glasses to dab at his eyes with a silk handkerchief, and as an afterthought wiped away beads of sweat that had been gathering on his forehead. Strange, because he had not been exerting himself, and it was chilly in the penthouse. He didn't spare the air conditioning. Alarmed, I said, Are you all right? Yes, I'm fine. His naked eyes looked like those of a blind man, or at any rate like one unused to normal vision. But they focused on me suddenly, and I found myself wishing he would put his glasses back on again. He said, I'm afraid that wasn't very funny. I gave a weak smile. Well, you had me fooled there for a second. He looked at his glasses, looked away, then with a snapping motion of his arm put them back on again. I could see the faintest flicker on his face when the back of the lenses lit up. He settled back on the couch, quiescent once more. He said, I'm afraid I don't have much of a sense of humor. I never took the time to develop it. This is one of my deficiencies. In my line of work, it is all numbers, all logic. Personality isn't important. I have little experience with jokes, parties, politics, statecraft. This is part of why I need the help of someone like you. Now he was avoiding the question I had asked and answering the question I didn't ask. Having assured myself that I was in no immediate personal danger, my alarm gave way to amusement at what an odd duck I was dealing with. For starters, here's a tip. Give someone enough scotch and they'll laugh at even your bad jokes, I guarantee. I smiled and waved my glass in the air. It was empty again. Help yourself, he said absently. At first I was annoyed, but seeing him sit statue still on the couch with only the slightest respiration in his chest and an almost imperceptible trembling of his head, I could see that in fact he was too busy to refill a poor guest's glass himself. I shrugged and went to get more of my scotch. With the skill of a somnambulist, his arm lifted as I passed by, holding his empty glass as he said, Please. I gave him his refill and sat down again. He spoke a terse command in Japanese and took his glasses off. Again. His eyes were no longer glazed with zombie-like stupor or manic brilliance, but appeared as regular brown eyes looking at me. It is also rude, I think, to have my eyes stuck in the glasses when I am speaking to someone. Usually I don't care, but I must make an effort, he explained, as a smart-looking woman in a gray suit walked silently into the room holding a single sheet of paper. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Cynthia. She is the CEO of the Tetsu Corporation. She runs the business so I can tinker around in the laboratory. She looked every bit Japanese to me. Pleased to meet you, I said, though I wasn't aware Cynthia was a Japanese name. It is, she said, and handed Tetsu the piece of paper. He said, I asked her to provide critical updates in printed form for now. This should be less distracting. Cynthia waited while he snatched the paper up to his face. His pupils were a blur as they ricocheted from side to side and up and down, scanning the whole page in seconds. He reached out, and Cynthia handed him a pen. He made a flurry of rapid strokes on the page and sent her, the pen, and the paper out of the room. He took a liberal sip of scotch and said, "Yes, that is good advice. We will both drink my scotch, which was yours, and laugh easier." He wiped more sweat from his forehead. Now, where were we? I doubted that he had actually lost the thread of our conversation, but I conceded it was possible. You were saying how you could help me in what I deemed important. Were you thinking of something in particular? His eyes rolled around in a manner that might denote boredom or consternation in a normal person, but I had no clue what it meant in his case. He said, "What is something you are working on right now regarding Parliament? Something you are having trouble with?" "You mean the Farm Bill?" He scowled. "No, not the Farm Bill." "Well, what's bothering me the most is I can't get support for basing an aircraft carrier in the Falklands. They say it's too expensive. I can't make them see it's too expensive to not have a carrier there." Tetsu was silent as he perused and annotated another piece of paper Cynthia had brought him. Then he turned back to me and said, "I don't see it either. What possible strategic use of the Falkland Islands? And a naval base? As Patton said, fixed fortifications are monuments to human stupidity." "Naval bases don't count as fixed fortifications," I barked. Something was off. Tetsu, like everyone else I broached the subject to, was a citizen of a maritime nation, and he was surely smarter than them. Either he was trying to trick me, or the area of strategic thought was another of his deficiencies. It was possible, I thought. Patiently, I said, "It's not the islands, it's the whole South Atlantic." He said, "But there's nothing in the South Atlantic." Yes, I thought sadly, he too was oblivious. Perhaps his grasp of larger matters was not as great as I had suspected. I pressed on. "The whole South Atlantic and the Drake Passage." "The Drake Passage?" "It's a narrow channel between South America and Antarctica. Now, as to the South Atlantic, you say there's nothing there, but you need to realize that there's a shitload, excuse my French, of seafloor under all that water, teeming with resources which must one day—" Tetsu waved his hand. Yes, undersea mining, etc. You don't need an aircraft carrier for that. And what does the Drake Passage have to do with any of it?" I hesitated. Beyond this point, I knew my listeners would begin smiling and nodding while clearly thinking I was insane, perhaps dangerously so. Then I thought he would want to know my full opinion. That's why I was there. I said, "Sea lanes to Antarctica must be kept open because this continent is geopolitically important now and will only become more so." I stopped and waited. To my shock, Tetsu began whooping with laughter. When he ran out of breath, he refilled his lungs with a hoarse whistling sound and resumed his manic mirth. I stared numbly, feeling a growing apprehension. As he kept laughing, sweat pooled on his forehead and began dripping off his face. Was he mad? Cynthia walked in and dumped a bucket of ice water on Tetsu's head, who yelped once and was silent. As she walked out, he muttered, "Domo arigato gozaimasu." His straight black hair plastered to his head. I gripped the arms of my chair, resisting the urge to flee. Flee where? His men had the keys to the elevator. I cleared my throat and worked my tongue around my dry mouth before speaking. "Are you okay, Dr. Tetsu?" My voice was full of concern for myself, but I hoped he would think it was for him. He smiled and said, "We've had such a nice talk, Mr. Gray, but I am pressed for time, very pressed." My fear gave way to annoyance. "I'm still not sure why you've asked to speak to me." Tetsu said, "Do you believe in magic?" "No." "A trick, then. Would you like to see a trick?" "I don't know." "It's simple. It'll only take a moment." I shrugged, and he indicated a drawer. "In there you will find some ordinary low-watt light bulbs. Would you select one, please?" I thought, why not? I was getting curious now. Opening the drawer, I saw about a dozen little light bulbs, each different, but all around the same size. I selected one at random. "Now," he said, and I noticed his eyes were closed. "Examine the object closely. Do you notice anything unusual?" I turned it back and forth. "No." "All right. Now get a few paces away from me and slowly move the light bulb towards my face." I did as he asked. When it was less than a foot from his face, the light bulb began to glow in my hand. I confess that I dropped it in surprise. It did not break, but bounced a few times, making tinny little ringing sounds. As if this sound had roused him from a trance, Tetsu opened his eyes and chuckled, then put his glasses back on. I said, "How'd you do that?" He gestured at the light bulb. "Take it as a souvenir. You may try to figure it out if you like. I must bid you au revoir, Mr. Gray. Tonight I will show you out." He returned to his couch and froze. Back to work. The man in the suit stepped a few feet from the elevator and gestured toward it. I waved at Tetsu and said, "Cheers," and got on the elevator. On the way out, Tanaka said, "Wait," and handed me a blank white envelope. I could feel something like a bookmark inside. I considered asking him about it, but he was gone. I began walking across the city to the house of my friend, Lady Nassau. This would soothe me and give me time to think. What the fuck just happened? One of Terra's most notorious plutocrats had asked to speak with me. To what end? What did he learn? Nothing not already known in parliamentary circles. I presumed there was something about me in particular, not just my opinions. Was there something he wanted to say to me? But he hadn't. He had revealed nothing except to demonstrate his power. That may have been his only intent, but for what purpose? With a burst of adrenaline, I remembered the light bulb. My hand slipped into my coat pocket, still there. Not only had he showed me power, he showed me a power I did not comprehend. Lost in reverie, I was startled by an open palm slamming into my chest. I was rocked on my heels, but recovered my balance, and my introspection was replaced with incandescent fury. Most angry at myself for not having my guard up while traversing the increasingly dangerous streets of London at night. My eyes focused on four angry-looking youths, tense with menace. I scowled at them and hissed, "Can I help you?" The apparent leader said, "Give us your money." I snorted, "Money? I don't need money." The leader said, "The fuck are you talking about?" I roared, "Something you wouldn't understand, you miserable little cunts." They flinched and the leader pulled out a knife. I said, "You'd look pretty stupid with that knife sticking out your ass." He looked down at the knife, then back up at me, and said, "You better shut your gob and hand over the money before I take that personally." "I've not one more second to spare for you," I bellowed. They were looking over their shoulder, probably wondering if anyone was hearing this. "These are my streets, not yours, so give me the road while you count yourself fortunate your bollocks are still attached." "You threatening us, Grandpa?" They twitched as I reached into my pocket where the light bulb was. If you don't fuck off in 5 seconds, you will be reported to Prince Charlie. In 2 seconds, they started backing away. In 4 seconds, they were trotting away. They didn't know if I was telling the truth. They didn't care. They'd had enough. It was true I knew the prince. Though I hated gangsters in general, Charlie was a lord of sorts, and it was part of my job to know all the lords. He was a bad man for sure, but there were a few in Parliament who were still. I glanced around the dark, now empty street, wary, and moved a few blocks over where there was more activity. It would lengthen my trip, but it would be safer. I could not rely on cowing every assailant. My hand went into my other coat pocket to touch the envelope. I'd wait until I was indoors to see what it was. When I got to Lady Nassau's, I listened at her iron-banded oak door and heard a violin. This meant she was awake and alone. She never played for other people, except at the symphony. I let myself in and walked past a hall of paintings. There was a narrow lake in the United States with steep hills on either side covered in trees, little cottages receding up the shore into the distance, all different. The greatest object in the painting was the sky. It lit up everything. I almost felt the need to squint, observing those luminous clouds, and imagined a warm breeze blowing through my hair. There were a few portraits. One was a distant ancestor of the lady, a man with shoulder-length dark brown hair and a gaunt countenance, dark eyes, and an expression of deep cynicism. He wore a black tunic with gold embroidery over a suit of fine chainmail. If you looked closely, you could see every link in the armor. The man's hand rested on the jewel-encrusted pommel of a long sword. My favorite was an abstract piece. I didn't care for so-called abstract art generally, but this was an exception. At first glance, it was just a muddle of lines, shapes, and colors. But as I looked closer, order appeared, and I could see the intention of the artist to make something unique and beautiful. The time and skill it took. This was the last time I'd ever see those paintings. I noticed a tear slip out my eye. The lady had been playing one of my favorite works of Fauré, and I had been listening whilst looking at the paintings. When she finished, I began clapping, gasped, then, "Andrew? 'Tis I, Tildy." I heard some small noises as she placed her violin on its stand and walked into the hall. She was barefoot, wearing a black silk slip, and her expression was pleased and annoyed. "What are you doing skulking in my domain at this hour?" she demanded. "I've had a busy day, my lady, and I was looking for a quiet place to rest and get a fresh outfit." She arched a perfect eyebrow. "An outfit? Don't you have one? This suit is rumpled from walking around all day, and it stinks like anxiety." "I have an outfit," she conceded. "Anxiety? I had a busy day. I wouldn't even know where to start." My awareness wandered away from her direct gaze. I looked at a lamp, and my eyes traced a power cord leading back to an outlet. The excess cord was bound up with a zip tie. And then I looked back at the lamp. From under the square shade, its light cast a pool on the floor. I knelt down by the cord, reaching into my pocket. Tildy put her fists on her hips and said, "What in the blazes are you doing, Andrew?" I ignored her, not out of rudeness, but my attention was absorbed in my task. Holding Tetsu's little light bulb, I slowly moved it towards the power cord. When it was 2 feet away, it began glowing. I said, "It's built with a complete circuit made out of superconducting material, even the filament," I muttered, "and the fucker set it off with his head, or so it seems." She was standing behind me now. I could hear the rustling of her slip close by my ear. "Are you done playing with your trick light bulb, Mr. Gray?" I stood up and turned around, looking down at her pert expression. "Yes, I am, my Lady Nassau. Now, if you don't mind, I must retire, for I have a big day ahead of me, and I need my rest." "Not so fast. There is a price for disturbing me late at night." With a shrug, her slip fell to the floor, and she was naked. A little on the skinny side she was, but exquisitely well-formed, like the art in her hall. She grabbed my belt with her left hand and began twirling my mustache with her right, a grin spreading across her face, a spark in her eye. "As you know, I've got a magnificent, my detractors say ridiculous, mustache. Mirror image, thick spirals that extend straight out past my face on either side. It's sort of my trademark." We didn't have sex exactly. She said she was saving herself for marriage, though she seemed in no hurry to get married. Our routine was we'd strip and shower, her first, me second, and then we'd help each other to mutual satisfaction. This process averaged about 40 minutes and could go as long as 90 minutes, which was both delightful and excruciating. But she was one of only 2 women I'd ever been intimate with to that point, so I assumed it was normal. That night, I think I fell asleep in the middle of it, though it was after she was satisfied, of course. When I woke up, she was gone. An outfit I would describe as sporty, conservative, smart and comfortable, was laid out on a large hassock. It's as if she knew I would be traveling. After a long, hot shower, I set about transferring the contents of my old outfit to my new outfit, the most noteworthy contents being a light bulb and an envelope. I ripped it open and found a plastic ticket. Then, for the second time in less than 24 hours, the object in my hand slipped from my grasp. I must stop doing that, I thought. It was a round-trip ticket for a shuttle leaving Falmouth Spaceport on the following week and going to Asgard 1. Asgard 1 was the largest and most opulent of all orbital hotels, the largest of any artificial satellite for that matter. It was said to be populated solely by the fabulously wealthy, a few workers, and agents from a dozen or so different governments, spying on the affluent guests and each other. I had to lay back down on the bed. I felt dizzy. Obviously, Tetsuya meant for me to go to his satellite. Why? No clue. But all that aside, the thought of a trip to Asgard 1 was both daunting and enticing. On the one hand, I dreaded the thought of space travel. Flying in an endless vacuum in a little tin can did not seem like a good idea to me. One little thing goes wrong, and then you boil, freeze, and explode, and all in less than a second. On the other hand, it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up. Not only would I get to gaze down on Terra from orbit and see such a profusion of stars as couldn't be imagined looking up through the atmosphere, but I would rub elbows with some of the most powerful people on Terra, all in one place. I had never dreamt of such a coup, and now here it was. I would have to see my father to say farewell, just in case. He was currently back in Scotland, and I was able to hitch a ride on an RAF training flight whose pilot consented to drop me off at our local airfield, even though the runway was a wee bit short. The sun crossed the sky slowly at this time of year, and the days were long. It was a bright blue sky. the air too cool to sweat and not cold enough to shiver. I inhaled deep and realized how much I had missed home and how dreary was the necessity of working in the city. Learning that my father was playing golf, I hitched a ride to our course. I did not know the driver, but he knew me, and I listened happily to a torrent of local anecdotes, only occasionally prodding him to bring forth a stream of fresh gossip. The idiom of my home helped restore my sense of inner peace. I drove a cart out to the 14th hole to meet my father, who was playing around with the judge from Sterling. He was wearing black slacks, a white button-down shirt with a stiff collar under a wool vest and tam o'shanter, and wool socks and sandals. The pipe he was puffing on left a trail of smoke behind him for several feet before it was scattered by the wind. He was still as he lined up his shot, then drew his club back a foot, and then again to the ball once, before drawing all the way back and swinging in a graceful motion with deceptive speed. The ball flew into the air at a precise 45-degree elevation, going slightly to the left before the wind pushed it into the middle of the fairway. It was past 300 feet, I knew. The judge said, "Here's your bye to see you, Trampier." My father turned around slowly. He had the bushy eyebrows, like me, that were associated with that region. They were now iron gray. Our other features were less typical, what I thought of as Norman. As near as we could figure out, we had at least two ancestors who crossed the channel with William I. He grinned and said, "What are you doing here, Andrew? I thought you were in London." "It's nice to see you as well, Da. The fact is I'm going on a trip abroad, and I thought we should have a few pints at Brenda's." He glowered and said, "Capital. Why don't you get a head start while his honor and I finish out the round?" "Aye, Da." I got back into the cart and returned to the clubhouse, then set off on foot to the village. Long a family of knights, the Trampiers became lords in the reign of James I. Our diplomatic skills were effective in securing the union of England, Wales, and Scotland under one crown, and our reward was this valley I walked in that day, where we had lived ever since, Trampier Dale in County Stirling. Trampier Village had grown from a hamlet into a modest country town that boasted an inn, a bookstore, a general store, 2 churches, and Brenda's pub. Most of the inhabitants worked on our land or at the distillery, though a fair number of tourists provided a valuable custom. Brenda's was not noted for their food, so I went to the inn. I ordered a filet mignon from a grass-fed Trampier steer. All our cattle were of the Devon breed, reddish in color. They had both superior meat and milk. We thought they had superior personalities as well. I never rush when I'm eating, but at that time, Shelby, I didn't dilly-dally either. I ate as fast as I could properly savor the steak. My father would be a while yet on the golf course, but he was driving, not walking, and I wanted to be a pint ahead when he got to the pub. After my steak, I went across the street to Brenda's. Her father had started the pub and named it after her. He'd retired to Spain a few years before, and now Brenda ran the place. She was my favorite person. It was with her that I got really drunk for the first time, right before she took my virginity. It was dark in the pub except for little lights that hung over each table and over the bar. It was slow, and the patrons seemed to be all locals. Tourists tended to drink at the inn. A few people recognized me, tipped their caps, and turned back to their pints. As far as I knew, this was the least excitable pub on the Isle of Britain. I loved it. To my delight, I saw that Brenda was behind the bar, polishing the mirror. She was wearing a simple dress the color of burlap. Her bright red hair was long and curly, fanning out across her shoulders. I walked up to take a seat at the bar. I said, "Hey, Firebrand." She whirled around, her hair flaring up and out before settling back down. Her big green eyes burned with recognition. "Andrew." She put a hand to her cheek and smiled. "May I get you a pint?" "Please." As she poured, she spoke over her shoulder. "What are you doing home?" "I'm going abroad, and I wanted to see my dad before I went. And you," I thought. She set my pint on the bar and leaned towards me. "And where would you be going?" "Space," I whispered. She blinked, paused, and said, "You're pulling me leg, Andrew Gray. You're no astronaut." "No joke, Brenda. I've got a ticket to go to Asgard 1. She frowned. "And what is Asgard 1? "It's the newest orbital hotel, and the largest. It's like a big wheel that floats over Terra. I can make some important contacts there." "Well, it sounds just lovely. How long are you home for?" At that point, we cheerfully gossiped and chattered about local matters, incidentally deciding that I would try to return to the bar by 11 p.m., which is when it closed typically. 2 pints later, my father arrived and boomed, "Pint and a shot, Brenda." There was a slight rumble in the pub as a few people muttered, "Afternoon, Lord Trampier," and chairs shifted as people got a better look at the newcomer. After nodding their heads politely, they turned back to their drinks. If King Henry himself had walked into the pub, he may have merited a toast, but that would be about it. My father took a seat next to me, downed his shot with celerity, and took a drink from his pint. "Welcome, Lord Trampier," Brenda cooed. "How are you today?" A grin spread from side to side of his broad face. "Half in the bag and 5 under par, me scarlet-haired lass. Have ye been telling me by to shave off of that ridiculous mustache?" My father could not tell that she blushed, I don't think, but I could. "My lord, I like Andrew's mustache. The longer and milder the better, I say." He laughed, slapping his massive hand on the countertop several times, then wiping a tear from his eye. "Quite right, my girl, quite right." He turned to me, sobering up. "So where were ye thinking of going, lad?" I showed him the ticket. His eyes widened, then he scowled. "How in the fuck can you afford a first-class ticket to that space station?" The last 3 words were hissed as if the idea were somehow scandalous. Brenda was turned to the side. She did have such a lovely profile, polishing a pint glass and affecting indifference, but I knew she was listening. I could see wheels turning in my father's head. Who paid for that ticket? The proprietor of the establishment, Shichiro Tetsu. My father frowned. He looked up, raised one bushy eyebrow then the other. His eyes narrowed. "As in the Tetsu Corporation?" I nodded. "The chairman and majority shareholder?" I nodded. He looked sad. "Son." His head turning back and forth in disbelief. "What are you doing mixed up with such a one? Is he trying to sell ye a bulldozer franchise?" "No," I snorted. "Frankly, I have no idea what he wants. So far, he spoke to me once in his penthouse at the Iron Arms, but he just asked me the same questions anyone else has." "About what?" It seemed to revolve around my idea for a Falcon carrier base. "Oh, that. Maybe he wants to build it." Build the base? I was thinking of the carrier. If we have a carrier base there, we'll need an additional carrier dedicated for it. We've only got 2 as it is, and we can't stick 50% of our carriers in the South Atlantic on a long-term basis. I hadn't thought of that. I don't think that's the case. In the first place, the government wouldn't farm out the production of an aircraft carrier to a foreign country under ordinary circumstances. In the second place, I'm not sure he's equipped to build one. Oh, I don't know. I've heard the railgun cruisers he built for India are cutting edge. He's got decent shipyards. But let's assume he's not interested in building a carrier. Did he ask you about Antarctica? I paused. Not really, but he got me talking about it, and as soon as I did, he laughed his head off. Can't say as I blame him. People don't care fuck all about that. But the potential. People don't care about potential. They care about what can you do for me today. Today, Antarctica is a very big, very cold pile of shite. Sullen, I ordered another pint. What he said was true. It might take open war with Argentina before Parliament started caring about naval aviation in the South Atlantic. And at that point, Britain would be at a disadvantage. As if he was reading my thoughts, he said, "The war scenario with Argentina isn't convincing either. They're in no hurry to jump." Not right now, but that could change quick. If they manage to consolidate the La Plata Basin, the Falklands are next on their menu. Bah! Grabbing the Falkland hydrocarbon fields would accelerate their war efforts. They would want them first, not second. If they coulda, they woulda. Trade routes, I thought. Sea lanes. Argentina doesn't have to attack trade routes, but their ability to do so would stifle investment in the region. Neutralizing this ability would be essential to maintaining trade routes. But at that time there were no significant trade routes south of Buenos Aires. I would not bring it up. We sat in silence for a few moments. After a while he said, "So basically, you have no clue what Tetsu wants with you." Not exactly. Now I recall that he was hinting about employing me in the capacity of a lobbyist or perhaps as some kind of political consultant. I've managed to figure that much out, but as to what I'm supposed to be lobbying for or consulting on, I'm in the dark. I paused. Maybe. I took the light bulb out of my pocket and said, "Watch this." I held the bulb up to the dangling power cord of one of the bar lights. It glowed. "He gave me this," I explained. "A trick light bulb. I'm guessing it's made from some kind of superconducting material. It's sensitive enough that even a small magnetic field can induce a current which lights it up." I pressed the bulb to my forehead. "You see anything?" He squinted. "I think I see a flicker." I frowned. "Hold it up to your own head." He did so, and the bulb winked softly. "Also a flicker. It can register electrical activity in the brain." "Tetsu put it on his own head, didn't he? How'd it light up for him then?" "Brighter than it did for us," I grumbled. He chuckled. "Well, lad, he showed you 2 things. He can make sophisticated light bulbs, and he's probably brighter than both of us put together." I thought a moment. So we may deduce thus far that he may want to hire me for something that involves politics, and he wants me to know he is powerful. Put that together, and I'd wager what he has in mind is pretty big. My father shrugged. "We know that. He doesn't do anything small. Him or his dad." "You knew his father?" "Played golf with him a few times. Nice man, great businessman, sharp, but not like his son. That's Shishiro. He took what was a good family business and made it an empire. Japan was on the rocks when he took over the business, and he dragged the whole country up with him, and he's just getting started. I'll tell you what I think, lad. I think you've got the job and don't know it yet. Whatever it is big, and we Trampiers have a record of doing big things. You go to space, Come back when you can. I know you make me proud. He clapped his hand on my arm and said, I've got to get back to the house. Things are waiting. You stop in before you go if you can. With that, he lurched to his feet and was gone. Brenda was looking at me in wonder. Andrew, you're a great man. I shook my head. Greatness is at least half accident. The most we can aspire to is to be good and to endure such greatness that comes our way with such grace as we can summon. She grinned. A good man you certainly are, Andrew Gray, and for my part, I think you're a great man as well. The color was rising in her cheeks again. I emptied my pint glass and gestured for a refill. Brenda, my dear, I must return south in the morrow. Tonight I make merry. By the time the last patron had left, I was good and drunk, but my speech was clear, and I did not stumble once as I ascended the stairs, even though Brenda was pushing me in good humor, trying to hurry me along. Sex with Brenda, from the very first time, felt to me like making love. She was the one I wanted, but I was protective of her. I couldn't imagine her outside the safety of Tramper Dale, exposed to the rot of the outside world, and I would never ask her to join me there, where I had the unpleasant duty of working. She climaxed several times that night and fell asleep in my arms. I found it difficult to sleep, tired, drunk, and worried as I was. In the small hours of the morning, I lay in bed, Brenda nestled in the crook of my arm, dreaming, her warm breath puffing on my chest, her soft hair spilling over my shoulder. Wide awake, I stared across the dark room at the rectangle of the window. The Scottish night was pale, the stars wan. When a meteor streaked across my view, its brightness, relative to the other objects, was marked. All at once, my elation and excitement about my future prospects yielded to sudden, crushing sadness. For the first time, I considered the possibility that I might not see Scotland again, or my family, my home, my first friends, my best friends. Who knows? I thought it could happen. I did not for an instant consider changing my course, but I wondered at the potential cost of my decision. Angrily, I slammed my mind shut on this unprofitable train of thought. I determined I would deal with events as they arose, after making what preparations seemed reasonable. Worry was not a reasonable preparation, and I would have none of it. Worry was a thief that robbed me of what peace the present moment had to offer, and thus left me poorer in the future. I would not worry. I turned away from the window onto my side and faced Brenda. I slipped my other arm around her, and in her sleep she snuggled closer. My thoughts dropped away one by one, until I was aware of nothing else but her skin on mine.